Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnoni.
bringing you this week's Ascending World Collective Energy Share. So a little bit of stuff this morning. That's why we're a little bit later than usual.
Hey, we're worth the wait.
That we are. And it's funny because you think that Sarah and I, so here's the thing. I laugh about this because you think Sarah and I are talking about stuff based on what's going on in world events. But the funniest thing is we had this conversation last week before everything blew up over the weekend.
Right.
And I'm always like, oh, it's always so perfect, right?
Right.
Even
timely.
and timely, right? And it fits in with current topics. And it's funny because if you go back and you haven't looked at, if you just recently started watching or listening to our podcast or whatever, if you go back, and this isn't to brag, this is just an observation. If you go back to what we were talking about in December, January, it was all about that house arrest thing and the feeling of house, and it had to do in a different context, but it's funny that we're actually using the term house arrest. And so it's funny how all this stuff is just is falling in as we're seeing it. It's not just us. This is
Right.
This conversation every week culminates from conversations we've had together with other people in sessions, things we've seen in our meditations and all kind of stuff. So
Right.
that's why we call it the collective energy share, because it really relates not just to us individually, but to everybody.
Right. Right.
And so it's funny, yet again, we have the conversation last week. And so then the question is, do we actually create this, or is it just that we see it happening?
Well, I think we sense the energy before it manifests itself.
That's right. But right, because we're constantly committing ourselves. Good morning, Gloria. We're committing ourselves to tuning in and listening, feeling,
Right.
not just listening, but feeling.
Feeling, yeah.
And so the feeling comes before the manifestation. And
right.
And so the thing is, if we're putting on I think when I say that, I think of rubber gloves that go up to my shoulders,
Right.
Putting on our gloves and reaching in, it's when we do that, obviously we always bring up then whatever tidbits are our own individual things. And then that's the first reflection we see because it's personal, right?
Right. Well, and I think that the more we embrace our house arrest and turn inward. So, when you talk about putting the gloves on, it's like reaching in, not reaching out, but reaching in and dredging up. And I think that, this is perfect lead into what we're going to talk about today is that illuminated darkness. And, it's my understanding is that the more we focus on the bright light of what's right, the more those shadows get deeper, darker, crisper, sharper. That's a really good word for it.
Yes.
And I feel like we're just so there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, look at what's going on.
I know. And and that fits perfectly into what we said the other day is that there's right on both sides of that.
Mm-hmm. Because one, as we've said, one doesn't exist without the other, right?
Right.
So, it's funny. One of the things that, and I've spoken about this before because we have had this discussion before, but look at how it has now really been pushed in our faces, all of us, right?
Right.
And if
you cannot look away.
And if it's not the virus stuff or something related to that or being in quarantine or whatever, now it's the race riot things that are starting.
Right. Well, and the way I understand it is the more you turn your attention to what's right, and the more you see things that you're judging as wrong, that it's like a self-fulfilling cycle of reinforcing the wrong because
and the creation of it.
Exactly. And so it's only until you get to that place of and I don't want to say disempowering the darkness, because that's not it. It's empowering both, embracing both.
It's embracing both without looking at it with judgment. It was interesting. I know you watched Killing Eve. Did you watch Killing Eve last night?
Yes, it was so good.
And
I found myself laughing at so many parts of it.
Oh, I know. So anyway, in that, at the end, not to spoil the end of the season or anything, but anyway, and at the end, Villanelle and Eve are having this conversation. I thought, what a wonderful conversation that they had. Good morning, Anne. And they were talking on that bridge, on the bridge.
On the bridge.
And Villanelle says to Eve, do you think I, like something along the lines of, do you think I, something about her monster. Oh, she said, do you think I'm a monster? And Eve says, we all have the monster inside of us. It's a matter of how we let it come out.
Right.
And so it's just that, hers is right there on the surface. And she's not apologetic about it. Right.
No.
And then she said, well, I think our monsters just feed each other, or encourage each other or whatever. And I thought, I know, but the thing is, that's what's going on right now. Right. And I thought,
absolutely.
That little conversation was such a perfect encapsulation of, what? It's acknowledging that we all have the monsters inside of us. Right. And
and the more we as a society try to shut out the darkness and judge it away, because that's what prison is.
Yes.
Judge it away. The more we do that, the crisper and darker the shadows get, and the more our judgment of it reinforces it, and it becomes such an amazing dance between the two that
never ends.
Exactly. It's self-perpetuating.
Yes,
absolutely.
So that's what we wanted to talk about today, because with what has been going on the last several months, right? Not even talking about this weekend, right? We're talking about the last several months. This has been the perfect opportunity, and many are feeling discouraged. They're feeling futile, right? Sense of futility. And they are saying, well, this is horrible. Like, look at people, and there are many who are looking at it and going, oh my God, look at this. And then you have people like judging their neighbors, and you have people judging everybody else for what they're doing or not doing. We've talked about that.
Right.
But, and then they get so triggered sometimes. Some people get so triggered by others that they've called the police, on their neighbors and their friends and family, because they're not doing what they believe is, to the letter of what they're being told to do, that would agree with them. Right. And so let's not talk about the semantics of that. The thing is the energy of the emotion that's coming up, that's causing that projection. Right. And then now look at what we have even further distracted ourselves with, is the whole racial thing, with the riot, the protests that many have turned into riots. And, we won't even go into that, because, we know that people are being hired to incite them.
Right. Yeah. Gloria says moments of feeling down and alone.
Yeah. And I think that's happening for a lot of people. I mean, I've had that too. And there are moments of futility of, I'm so done. Right.
Right. Well, and I do think that's comes from that symptom of not acknowledging that all of that's part of us.
Right. And saying, it's funny, there's somebody I was talking to last week in a session, and they were talking about as many right now, they're trying to disassociate themselves with the human race, right? Oh, well, I'm actually Pleiadian, or I'm actually this, and I actually come from this other place in the in the universe, and I've only been here I'm only here this one time to help hold this vibration. I'm like, except you're sitting here not because you're judging, right?
Right.
That's that very tricky ego that's saying, oh, you're not that.
Right.
You're just here visiting. No,
right.
We're all this.
Right.
We are
Right.
the ones inciting the riots. We are the ones receiving the victim, being the victims. We are all of it. We're the bullies and the perpetrators
Right.
and the perpetrated. And and so what us having to shut down our lives has pushed us to do, which is great, is push this all up to the surface because we have buried it so deeply.
Right. Right. Yes, I would agree.
The challenge is that we are so used to allowing ourselves to be consumed with the egoic, separation based emotions that we
Well,
get.
and the ego is the one who judges what's going on, which
Right.
is what is shining that light that's creating the shadows.
Mm-hmm. And then and so that's where we get lost in the undercurrent. Like it's like we get pulled out to sea, right, in the undercurrent, in the riptide of that, what we call what the ego considers ugliness and darkness.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah.
um
And how do you get out of a riptide? You
yeah,
stop struggling against it.
right, right. And so it's not that it's for us to, become part of that. Excuse me. Obviously, here come the yawns, but it's for us to know that we already are. We're the creators of it.
Right.
And what, even on the share we did Thursday night, I was like, where did we talk about that on the share? It's like, you and I've had these conversations too, is we love the drama. We
Oh,
love,
absolutely.
we love,
Absolutely.
it's so funny because I said, oh my God, before people were noticing this on social media, I said to my husband, I said, isn't it funny? Like with all of the distraction now and the judgment and everything going toward the situation with that's causing the protests and everything else. Now there's nothing in the news there's very little in the news about the virus suddenly, right?
Right.
Oh no,
Right.
everybody look over here.
Right. Right. And you also find people are becoming more embroiled in that than, okay, I'm home. Let me tend to the home fires.
Right.
There's much less of that.
Yep.
And there's much less of looking inward. It's like, oh nope, I found my new cause.
I found my new thing to distract myself with.
Right. Exactly.
And to
Exactly.
put this ugly energy and emotion, what I'm judging as ugly energy and emotion inside of me, I've now found something to project it onto so it feels better.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
now judge
exactly.
it openly
Right.
and externalize it and push it away from me instead of saying, oh, look at what we have inside of us that we're bringing up to do this, to create this explosion so that we can let it go finally.
Right.
And this is
Right.
I would say this is one topic we could talk about and talk about and talk about and talk about. It is so important. Oh my gosh, excuse my yawns. It is so important for us to look in the mirror and say, okay, well, what is this inciting in me? When I see this, what do I feel?
Right. Well, and I think we began this conversation when I was talking about something going on with myself, and I felt like everything was upgrading,
Mm-hmm.
and that I felt that I was going to be left behind because I wasn't part of the upgrade. And so that was bringing up fears within myself, which when you get in that place of fear, which we've all been in very recently, that's when judgments start coming in. So that egoic spotlight gets brighter, hotter, more intense, which sharpens the shadows, which creates that stark difference and judgment. It's a perfect place for judgment.
Right.
So all of those fears that everyone's feeling is just, it's like fanning the fire.
Right. Right. And then I said, well, that's right. When then we had that conversation, I said, well, Yeah, but what if, what if everything's going the other, like, what if it's being upgraded to catch up to you?
Right. Which, I don't think anybody goes, oh yeah, that's it. Right off the bat.
Except we keep on
That is
talking
the truth.
about what we've been doing on shifting our vibration, right?
Right.
That yes, all of these old paradigms just don't work with us anymore. So they need to be upgraded, or they're
Right.
upgrading naturally, right? So however that looks, it might look icky to the ego, right? Because it's breaking a lot of things. Yeah, and then looking at what, oh, see, I can't even talk about it without yawning. The looking at what has like sort of come up to the surface all over the weekend collectively means that, yay, good for us. We did a great job pushing it up to the surface. Now, what are we going to do with it?
Right. Right.
And it is important for us to stop just saying, oh, well, shine your light brighter, shine your light brighter. Well, when you shine your light brighter, you make the dark darker.
You turn up the shadows. Absolutely.
Shadows. That's the whole nature of duality and what we've created. And so it's for us to really recognize and fully acknowledge and exalt and accept and embrace that we are just really remembering our wholeness. And in doing that, just as much as us accepting and embracing our light is for us to truly accept and embrace the dark, because that is what we created.
Well, and that's how I don't want to say tip the balance, but that's how you equalize the light and the dark.
Dissolve it all, really.
To come to that wholeness, and that's where you get your illuminated darkness.
Right.
Is
right.
You remove the judgment and come to complete and utter acceptance of the allness of it.
Right. And I remember a conversation that came back to me with somebody I had been working with for a long time, several years back. And this man had been, spiritually attacked, had so many demons and attachments and all this kind of stuff. And I remember connecting in, and I said, I saw that he had been part of the Knights Templar or whatever, and carried this through, this idea of the epic battle of good versus evil.
Right.
And which many of us hold on to, right? So I was guided to work with this individual on was to change that, because that's what we've done from the beginning of the creation of duality. In fact, that's how we've created duality in many ways, to take two sides and then have them fight against each other, because
put them against each other. Right.
That makes them more intense and more real and more created. Right. So I had said, well, what if we did it differently? Instead of fighting because what is good and what is evil?
All judgment
and subjective. Ask 100 different people, you get 100 different answers.
Right.
And so,
well, and if you look at that from the perspective of just look at what's popular on television.
Right.
It's not someone who's successful, has money, who does good deeds, who helps, who, all the things that we say are good. Right. Nobody wants to watch that. That's boring.
Right.
Nobody wants to watch that. Everybody wants the killing and the murder and the, Game of Thrones. Is that how you? I don't watch it, so I don't know.
I don't either. I think you and I are maybe two of the only people left.
or Walking Dead, or any of these shows that are so popular aren't about running around shining your light, doing good deeds. People aren't interested in that. Right. They want to touch the dark side.
Well, we did. We went through a period of that, though. If you remember, we had Touched by an Angel. We had, all kinds of things like that for a while. And now it's like, you're right, because it was really funny because was it Saturday night? My husband and I were like, okay, it was like later on Saturday night. And we're just like, okay, there's got to be some movie that we haven't watched that we want to watch. And we were looking through the list of stuff on like Voodoo, right? And what's on rental. And I was just like, I'm like, if you just look at the collection of new releases from the past, say, 6 months, I'm like, you know what? 80+% of them are horror movies,
Right.
or psychological thrillers, and I'm like, look at how we have brought the darkness to the surface in a way that is acceptable to us.
Right. We can dabble in it and then step away. Right. My husband and I refer to it as murder, death, kill.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just murder, death, kill.
That's right. Or yeah, murder, death, kill. Well, yeah, because then that would include the supernatural stuff too, because there's a lot of that out there, which I think is interesting.
Right.
Oh, Anne said she doesn't watch either. I'm guessing the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I think it's just the three of us.
We'll start a small club. But Gloria says desensitization. Well, no, I think it's actually more so of our ability to our fascination with the darkness, and like we can call it desensitization, but I think it's just, and it is in a way, right? But the only reason we're sensitive to something is if we judge it and we're afraid of it, or we don't like it, right? Because it makes us uncomfortable, right?
Well, or that we're seeking sensation.
Right.
Whether it's, the always the fine line between pain and pleasure. It's like we're seeking some sensation.
Yeah. There's actually a category in Voodoo called, was it Voodoo or was it Amazon Prime? Because we went through we literally were looking at trailers for like an hour before we were just like, there's nothing.
We've gotten so desperate, we find an actor or actress that we like their stuff and look and see what they've done.
Yeah. Actually, we did end up watching a movie that was pretty old, and I was like, oh, how did I never see this? It had like Meryl Streep in it. And I was like, oh, and anyway, so what was I saying about that?
Oh, a category that
there was a category called pushing boundaries. I thought that was interesting, that there was actually a category of movies that were called pushing boundaries. And I was like, oh, what do I say to Scott? Oh, let's look at what movies are in
right.
here.
We got to check that one out.
Yeah, check that one out. And the funny part was we had seen a number of them.
Oh, we've seen all these.
I mean, and then the ones we hadn't seen, I was like, oh, yeah, look at the discomfort I get from looking at this trailer.
Right.
I was like, okay, well, but the good part is, it is, in a way, it is desensitized. But the thing is that we're taking it out of the closet, which is great.
Right.
Because it's not like it's not there. We want to judge, and we want to say, oh, this is ridiculous. And, look at all this, fighting and action stuff, and, killing, and
you kill somebody and they get right back up.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, no.
Yeah. And yet, I think that's why now I know how to try it twice, but I got so hooked into Killing Eve, because it is such an exploration of the fascination of our own darkness, right? Like in that conversation, right, of our own monsters, right?
Right.
And recognizing that we all have them.
Well, and experimenting or watching through movies, I think we've deemed it as safe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that I can go and immerse myself and enjoy and be okay, and then come out in the light of day and I'm no different. I'm not a bad person.
Right. Because it's not me. It was just a character in a play or a movie, which is funny because we're just characters in our own movies, right?
Yeah, we went from that movie to this movie.
So we watched a movie inside of a movie, like the dream inside of a dream. And so it is so important for us to step back. And it's not to say go and start, killing people or anything, right? It's to
absolutely.
It's to look at that aspect of ourselves and not externalize it anymore, right? To say, okay, look at that. And if I didn't identify with this at all, I wouldn't have any judgment for it.
Right. Right.
Right. And I'm not going to say, because, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, you'd be attracted to it. No, sometimes you are completely repulsed by it. And the reason you're completely repulsed by something is because you have some deep connection to it that you
Right.
judge so deeply that you're just like, keep it away from me.
Exactly. Exactly. It's almost, well, it's like, I don't want to say disempowering the shadow. It's just allowing it to come to its natural place in the balance of everything,
Mm-hmm.
versus having that charge that, whether you consciously believe it or not, is an attraction.
Right.
And, you know, it's like that Carl Jung phrase that I just love that says, you know, making the unconscious conscious. And if you know, the longer you don't, you'll be victim to it, and you'll call it fate. And I know that's not an exact quote, but it's making the unconscious conscious. So your unconscious shadow self, shadow version, will always have, as long as it's unconscious, will be a driving force in your life.
Yes.
And by bringing that into the conscious, that's where you get into the illuminated darkness.
Right. And the ego has gotten so very crafty, right, at hiding this, because when we do finally illuminate it, it does bring everything to an equal playing field in a way of consciousness, right?
Right.
It wasn't an equal playing field before because it was equal and opposite. Right now, if we bring it all up, it just becomes whole, and then both sides lose their power.
Right. Right. It's not a question of disempowering. It's just a question of equalizing and
well, not even equalizing. It's almost like coming beyond that, right?
Right.
Encompassing both.
Right. It's that what is that? The power that's created in the oh gosh, why can I not think of that phrase? It's like the sum of the parts is greater
synergy.
than
Synergy. Yeah.
Right. It's that energy that's created in the coming together.
Yeah. That's greater than its parts. Right.
Parts. Yeah.
And so
That's it.
So the wholeness, and that is our divine consciousness, because within the divine consciousness is where we created duality. So duality is not equal to divine consciousness. It is within divine consciousness as part of the very infinitely able whole that we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if, like, you know, when we say, you know what, there's something even more than light and dark.
Right.
The ego goes, what?
Right. Well, and the way I see this illuminated darkness is what you and I've always referred to as the creative void.
Yes.
It's where anything and everything is possible.
Well, and when the only time for us to create with an infinite possibility is when you do so with everything being possible. Well, okay, everything being possible. And for everything being possible means there's no judgment on the possibility of creation, right?
Right.
So whether you call it dark or light or purple or, you know, faceted or whatever, it's all the same.
Right.
And so, you know, and then we sit here and, you know, and I can hear it as saying this, I can hear this from the collective ego going, except so then what you're saying is, and we're this, you know, dark, nasty thing. And it's like, but that's the judgment, right?
Right.
You know, we created this, right? Some people get grossed out at the sight of blood, right?
Right.
Yet it is the mainstay of the functioning of our physical bodies. So
Right.
you can call it ugly, you can call it, you know, ew, that's gross, and da da da. But it is the beautiful, life-giving thing that allows our body to function in this particular presentation of reality.
Right.
And without it, the way we have it set up, you know, without it, we wouldn't exist here.
Right.
So is that disgusting and icky and ugly? No, right? But people like say, when they're saying, oh, well, I see blood and it disgusts me. And it's like, well, but that's a judgment, right?
Right.
And yes, when we see say we see, I mean, we all do it at some point, right? You see something in a movie or whatever, or in real life, you see like an injury or something where, the bone comes through the skin.
Right.
And the funniest thing is, think about that. What a perfect way of illuminating the darkness, right? Because all this stuff is always there inside of you. You just
right. You just can't see it.
You're just not seeing it.
Right. Right.
So you bring it out. And then what happens? Oh,
Right. Right.
And it's like, well, okay. So that's just very physical, but we have so much that's in the non-physical of that. We have so much in the equivalent of what's in the non-physical. And that is what we are creating in these movies and these shows and these stories. And in a way, like, it is a desensitization. I can't say that word today, because the more we allow it to come to the surface and illuminate it,
right,
the less it has power over us.
Right. Right.
Because then we start to see it differently.
Well, and we start to feel it differently, which is almost more important.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that again goes back to the whole like loving killing Eve, because I think just as many people love the sociopathic assassin in the show as they do the main character.
Right.
The main characters. Because there's a little piece of that in all of us.
Right.
Right. And it's not that we've like, and it's because, and it's for us, there's things. So there's a movie, I think I told you about this. There was a movie I watched a while ago, and this was one that was, this is one that is in the, I think I told you about this. It's called The Art of Self-Defense. I watched it on a plane because I had nothing else to watch. And because it had to do with martial arts or whatever, I was like, oh, okay. And
right.
That guy who just, I can never remember his name, but he's the guy who played the head of Facebook in the Facebook movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he was also in a bunch of other, like he plays really dry humor. The movie Juno, he was the guy in Juno, like all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I watched it and it was so incredibly bizarre, right? And so incredibly dark. It was so dark that it took me by surprise so much that there were some parts in it that I bursted out laughing, like outwardly on the plane, because I was like, oh my God. And then I like observed my reaction to that going, did I just laugh hysterically at that?
Right, right.
At this guy just like breaking this guy's like elbow, like it was over something really stupid. And I'm like, and that's such an observation because, everybody goes, oh, well, that's sort of dark, but it's like, yeah, but that's in us, right? We think about it.
Right.
We have the potential to do it.
Right. Well, and, like we talked about on, I guess that was Friday, how in the past we've said, don't get lost in your stories. Yes. Well, your stories are your subconscious trying to bring to light these things that you've been overlooking or denying or distracting yourself away from. And I know I did some looking this weekend at some point during the night when I couldn't sleep about things that have been a recurrent theme that I've been ineffective in shifting. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I noticed that in looking at it, like for instance, dental issues. And, you think of your teeth as so strong and so
permanent,
permanent. And, they're an image of strength, but yet we can create cavities and rot, disgust, and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's almost like it's a way of demonstrating our power within ourselves that we've been denying. And we think of that as a dark thought, but it's really not. It's like, I have that power. I've been denying it. So this is the way I'm reminding myself.
Right.
And it's like, once you come to that place, it's for me, at least, it was such a shift on an axis to like, oh yes, I see that for what it is. And then rather it being something that just I judge myself over and I get upset about, it's like, I'd like to claim that power.
Yes.
Yep. I'd like to welcome that power back home, welcome that back into my consciousness, and not have it be an unconscious activity, which was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's been a lot that is great. Yeah, that is. Yeah. And teeth has been one area where a lot of people have had weird things come up, especially those in the conscious, what we consider the conscious community, right? It's like funny.
Right.
That's been a recurrent theme, especially these past like year or two.
Well, and just think of like arthritic conditions that attack bone. That's another thing that you think of as, look how strong this bone is. And, it's that symbol of permanence. And to have that arthritis condition attacking the bone and
look at the energy that I can put in and just simply attack myself.
Right.
With it.
Right.
Yeah. And when you do that, yes. Well, when you do that, that does shift the energy. When you can turn around and say, that is
beautiful and powerful and it's mine. And now I can consciously acknowledge it versus let it run amok unconsciously.
Right. Because usually we say, oh, well, I have an immune system disorder, or I have this or whatever. And it's like, no. How about what if you said, well, I created this disorder. I have created this, right? And to say it with full responsibility of saying, I had the power to create that. I had the power to start deteriorating my own body.
Right.
Just from energy and shifting my DNA and creating
thoughts.
What power. And what if we take that power and like the acknowledgement of that saying, damn, I'm good.
Right. Right. I suck so good.
That's right. To a place of saying, wow, like if I have that kind of power and it's like, look at how I've created that. Let me shift that power to another creation.
Right. Or let me shift it simply by acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The need for sensation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did get a lot of sensation realizing that I'm destroying my teeth. It's like, it was almost like and I don't mean destroying my teeth because obviously they're still in my head, but that feeling of, it was literally like a veil being lifted saying, oh, look at this untapped resource that's always been here.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot of sensation, Laurel.
Well, and the sensation is part of separation. Sensation is what we created in separation anyway, because that's what the senses are all about.
Right.
The only reason we get any kind of sensation, whether it's sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, is all because of separation. And and I think part of what happens as we are getting into more of a space of wholeness is not being addicted to the sensation anymore.
Right. Or acknowledging that all sensations, it's that same thing of acknowledging all sensations to the point where everything's pleasure and everything's that blissful state, which is the wholeness.
Right. Even the deepest pain.
Right.
Yes. There was something recently. Yeah. The whole, and that's part of why we love the drama. Well, okay, so let's go back to that. Like, that's part of why we love the darkness so much, and we love the drama, because we love to create that. We love to create that sensation. We love to create the sensation of repulsion.
Absolutely.
We love to create the sensation of disgust and judgment and fear and anxiety, like just as much as we love bliss and and release,
almost more,
and expansion. Well, yeah. because look at, there's an entire field in psychology on negative reinforcement, right? Which is not what people think it is. It's not like,
Right.
it's not avoid, it's the removal of what we consider a negative stimulus, right? To create motivation, right? By removing negative stimulus, because we have such an ecstatic, adrenaline filled moment when we release that pain, right? When that pain goes away, when that, and that's what I think, that's a good thing to hit on, because that's something that I think we hit on with part of the challenge with energy work is this: us as people embodied, the pieces of our consciousness that are embodied, are so we're so entrained on that negative reinforcement, right?
Right.
That
Right.
all we do is become motivated by the belief that we need the negative reinforcement, right? Because that's what makes us feel opposing things. It makes us feel things like that adrenaline rush and stuff, right? By removing the thing that we felt like was dragging us down. It's like, okay, let go of the weight and then float up to the top of the surface. Oh my God, now I can breathe.
Right.
But if you never had that, are you going to appreciate breathing?
Right. Exactly.
And so that's part of the frustration that many of us that do energy work have is, people will just come to you when they have something wrong.
Right.
Because they want to remove it, negative reinforcement.
Right.
They want to, and that's what motivates them as a whole, right? It motivates them to,
well, and it becomes a familiar struggle that they can deem themselves as being successful, which is their version of clinging to the light. The desired part is I can always be wrong, so then I'm successful. If that makes any sense.
yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's what we've been talking about. So putting it into that light is what we've been talking about for a long time, right? Which is propulsion through separation and lack, right? Propulsion
Right.
through, and that's what we make decisions on. That's what we desire. Because, and so what happens is I get people who then get into this whole thing of, they do all this stuff in consciousness, they shift their reality, they get to this point of ease and flow, and then they become unhappy.
Right. Because the struggle's gone.
And they don't feel anything.
Right. Right.
Right.
Well, and I was reading someone saying that, people are so obsessed with, doing and living and doing all this stuff when no one's going to get out alive. We all will end up absolute failures because each and every one of us will die.
Right.
All of our attempts to create, all our 3D, we will ultimately fail because we will die.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because there was a movie. What was that? Oh, remember Rising? Did you see that? You saw that movie, right? Where it was the woman who was like the queen in this one part of the galaxy. She
was a maid here.
Yeah. Yep. And she reincarnated to.
Wasn't that Jupiter Ascending?
I'm sorry, Jupiter Ascending. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Close.
I get
Come
that.
On, Jupiter Rising, same meaning.
I know. Just making sure.
But and but the whole goal there was because they wanted to live 10,000, 20,000, whatever years, and
right.
and eternally. And I'm going, okay. So the thing is, I took a hard look at that. I'm like, well, when we think about that, I don't want to be in the same body for 30,000 years. That's boring. There's no variety in that, right? And in our consciousness, that's what we do. We create different bodies in different lifetimes. We create different forms in different parts of the universe, and we create all these different. And that's that separation. Because when we say I am this, when we come to say I am this, then we start to say I'm not that, right? And
right.
I'm lacking this, or I'm I want to be that because I have this holding me down. And that's that projection from propulsion, right? And so, but that all has to do, and this is just as much, like I said, the darkness. So we don't want to let go of the darkness. That's the problem right now. We
Right.
are fighting it so hard because we want it to continue, and yet we're done with this part of the game.
Right. Well, it was funny in one of my many thoughts mowing the lawn, which is my favorite meditation time, um, was back in prehistoric time or early man, whatever time you want to time frame you want to label it. Lifespan was very short. They had very few distractions. It was all about survival and then they were done.
Mm.
And then they came back as the next or whatever. And it's like we've managed to stretch the drama and the game out. And it's funny because that's always such a goal, is to live longer. And it's like part of me feels like we're going backwards, that the goal is to get here, experience this, and be done,
Right.
versus really drag it out. And
Right.
I
Because you could have this really short, intense, like,
right, right. And if the goal is to come to enlightenment or gosh, ascension or rise out of this, why are we staying in it for so long? Why is that such a desired thing? But
Yes.
that is so against what's right and what's considered normal and what's considered the light.
Yes.
So that's just another one of my
Right.
shadow musings this week.
Well, and yet there is no time either, right? So
That's
whether
true.
it's 6,000 years or 5 seconds,
Right.
Lemuria, right? The start of this entire thing was probably the equivalent of what, tens of thousands of years. Actually, probably even more than that. I'm hearing it's much more than that. And yet we were here before we started breaking up lifetimes and all that kind of stuff for like
Right.
that, because we just kept on shifting and changing, right? Without having to die.
Right.
And then we decided we had to die to shift and change. So we created these separate lifetime things or whatever. There's just a lot of,
There's a lot here.
it's like we've gone all over the place. There's like 50 different topics in this one thing.
We really have, but I think it still just comes down to allowing the light and dark to come to that place of wholeness.
Well, allowing
And
ourselves, how about just allowing ourselves to come to that place of wholeness
right.
and
Well, that within ourselves.
yeah. And the biggest thing is to, I would say, is that conscious acknowledgement of the things that you find the most disgusting, repulsive, and annoying things that are out there, to pull it back in and say, thank you. And I'm so glad it's part of me,
Right.
because it is. Thank you
I
for
mean
being.
that's a huge leap.
Yes. And if we just start with doing that, that will take us a long way, and really practice, because that is really part of the consciousness of unconditional love, right? It's part of that process of, that is the, like, remember the day, was that last week, where you had pulled that tower card and I had pulled the Cali card, right?
Right.
And I think,
I think it was last Monday.
was it, I don't know, that was like recently.
Right.
And like, not that, 'cause it's not to give, because that's the other thing, is people are like, oh well, we have these eclipses, we have these solar flares, we have these retrogrades, we have blah blah blah. And what I always say to people is, remember that everything that's going on is simply a reflection what's in here. So
Right.
it's not that out there is causing what's in here. This in
Right.
here is what's creating all that's out there.
Right.
So when we have something like solar flares, we have something like a retrograde that affects everybody, that is a collective thing that we are manifesting, that's inside of all of us.
Right. And it's just that external reminder.
Yes. So again, it comes back to that self-responsibility, and to do so with acceptance, and really allowing ourselves to say, you know what? Look at this darkness I created. Look at how beautiful it is.
Right. Yep.
Look at this, look at the depths of this and the heights of the other, right? Look at the vast expanse of contradictions that I've created in duality to make the beauty of the depth of what it is. It's going back to, you and I have said this, I am being able to say, I am Satan as much as I am God.
Exactly.
And to be comfortable, like 100% comfortable with it. It's like when I saw, I don't know when that was, a year ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, when I saw that coming into our power, truly our true power of creation is never fully realized until we embrace that darkness, right? Because if we only embrace the light, we're only ever embracing 50% of what we've created,
right,
of ourselves. So, and like I said, it's not carrying it out. It's not necessarily carrying it out. It's looking at it and saying, I have carried it out. We all have carried it out.
right.
We all have hated and killed and pillaged and hurt and tortured and bloody. You can go down the list of all the judgment words.
Right.
And as much as it repulses us, we love the repulsion. So to have gratitude for it.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, well, I couldn't have done that without being the exalted, ascended master or whatever that I am.
Right.
I couldn't have been the ascended master without being that whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, that shifts the energy of that too. Right, which is funny because that goes back to, for years I've been talking to people about anything that has an identity has an ego, no matter whether we call it, Archangel Michael, or we call it, whatever. And many have a hard time accepting that. I'm just like, well, that's us. It's just a different part of us. It's the exalted part of us. And it's like looking from the anthill up into the galaxy, except knowing that we're part of all of it, I don't know. It's just, this is sort of a circular topic and there's a lot to explore. We could talk about this for months.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think just the coming to that acknowledgement of that darkness within is a good first step.
I know. What makes it different though, because we've been talking about it for years, we've been talking about it for years openly, right? So what's going to bring everyone to actually doing that? That's the question.
I think it's just the inevitability of, the mentally understanding the process of the more I shine the light, the more the shadow sharpens. And just coming to that realization that that is all the wholeness.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, we've talked about this a lot of times. And the thing is, well, it's, there's something to do to push people. So to push us to really embrace it, right? To really shift, because we can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. What's going to actually shift us to a place? Like what would we do differently, right? And I know we can say this and we can go and do the same thing, but it's like, we're doing the same thing that we've talked about a lot of times, right? So what makes it different? What makes it different this time?
I mean, we talked about losing the judgment. I've lost count of how many times.
Yeah. It's actually just having to do it and not talk about it. Not getting off of this podcast for anybody or watching or listening or whatever and saying, oh yeah, I get it. That's great. And then not changing one damn thing about what you judge and what's going on inside.
Well, but I think that's a personal decision on everyone's part, because we're at that decision point.
It is. And the thing is,
It's like, are you going to be part of the solution, or are you going to perpetuate the problem?
right. And right now the collective ego wants to perpetuate the problem because we're addicted to this drama.
Right. It's that perpetuation. Exactly.
It is such a deep,
and it's again, which something else we've talked about is it's all about a choice.
right. But, and it's to be a conscious choice. And the point is you can avoid it for as long as you want, but it will never go away until you finally turn around and look it in the mirror.
Right.
You know, and I
you
have
give it a big old wet kiss.
Exactly. And a big hug and kiss and say, I love you. I've
missed you so much. You're my best friend.
Yes. And thank you for bringing out such a colorful experience.
Right.
Yeah. There was a guy who came to me once that he had been in like, I think I told you about this. He had been in special ops in the army, in the military or whatever. And he had gotten out because he said, you know, when he would go on these special whatever, and he would just flip a switch.
Right.
To do what he had to do. And then he'd come back and he'd flip the switch and be, you know, normal person again. Right.
Right.
And then he goes, at some point, I think my switch broke because I could never let go of that darkness I had to bring up within myself to do what I was commanded to do.
Right.
And he said, that's when he left the military. And he goes, except I have this dark being that's there over my shoulder all the time. And it's trying to whisper in my ear and da 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 da, and it tries to control me, and I do everything to fight it, and blah blah blah. And I said to him, have you ever turned around and said I love you to it?
Right.
And you would have thought that I pulled the trigger on some like massive like gun or something, like some nuclear missile.
Weapon of destruction.
He's just like, what? Have you ever turned around and said you love it and thank it? Said it's you. You realize it's you, right? It's not anything that's outside of you. It is actually you. And the way for it to stop having power over you is just for you to say, thank you, and I love you.
Right.
That was the last time you came to a session with me.
Well, maybe it worked.
I'm hoping it did. Just put it out there that it did. And so that's
what we need to do.
That's time for us to do it. So that's maybe what we're going to do today. Let's look at that dark shadow, the darkest thing you could think of, the darkest thoughts that you've had and never brought to light. We've all had them.
Well, or look in your life and see where it's showing up. Like mine was showing up with my teeth.
Yeah.
And I'm sure other places that I haven't dug around.
Immune system problems, cancer,
right.
Which is really like a chronic thing, you know.
Right.
It takes
or debt, financial trouble,
toxic relationships.
Yeah.
All kinds of limiting life situations.
Right.
Bigotry and bias.
Right.
Receiving and giving.
Right. Right. Slavery.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be enslaved to a lot of things. You can be enslaved to your job, enslaved to your family, enslaved to your bills, enslaved to your family, your ego.
Well, enslaved to the ego is pretty much what many have. So
right.
Most of us, right? So all of that. And to say, you know what, that's to be able to see that, to look at all of that in that way, right? And personify it, and then say, thank you for being an aspect of me. Thank you for being me and for creating this experience, and enable ourselves to bring it to the surface, to hug and kiss and love it and squeeze it.
and always be in a place of gratitude.
And always be in a place of gratitude for it.
So every time something reminds you of that enslavement or whatever, or anger or whatever, you have a moment of gratitude versus a moment of anger or resentment
or judgment.
Judgment.
Yeah.
Judgment. Exactly.
Yeah. So all of that, whatever we need to do for that. Okay.
That feels really nice.
That does feel really nice. All right. You ready? I think we
Yep.
hit it. Let's go. that I did not want to come back from.
Oh, that was beautiful.
And the longer out there, the deeper or more expansive I was going. I was like, oh. Then this song started floating in my head from God, the 80s. An Olivia Newton-John song. Remember the song "You Have to Believe We Are Magic"?
Oh yeah.
That starts floating. I'm like, I know this. And I was like following the frequency. I was watching the frequency. And I was like, oh, I know this song. Yeah. Nice. Well, that's a beautiful thing to sit in this week.
Right. Right.
Remember, every time this week, every time something comes up, every time fear comes up, every time anger comes up, or, you know, darkness of not just yourself, of other people, because it's just a reflection back to you. Go inside, turn around, open the door, and see the person that, you know, the personification of it, to say thank you, and I love you. So it shifted so much out there. Oh my God, I just kept on seeing layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. So what'd you see? Anything?
Yeah, it had a lot to do with nature, you know, like the volcanoes and the earthquakes and the tornadoes, and then like the rebirth. And it I don't know, it was that Taurus, that recycle,
Right.
the cycle of recycling.
Beautiful. Yeah. All right. Well, everyone's got their playing orders this week.
Right. Right.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off on this week's Ascended World. Have a great week.